Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is a video, or this video rather, is the first of its kind. I'm currently trying to discover the ways to go about making YouTube videos for CK3 specifically, but also for Paradox games and other strategy games. So the point of this channel is going to be to basically offer tutorials or examples of campaigns for people who want to learn, or just also to share some of my experiences playing some of these strategy games. So the reason why I started thinking about doing this is because earlier I had worked on a campaign in CK3. I started early on, just after release, as the Kirghiz Khanate. And I started expanding. I started working really tough on it, and then eventually I realized that the expansion was getting really serious, and up until the point where I was able to fulfill a world conquest. So the point is, I wanted to share some of this experience. It's actually unfortunate that I didn't start recording from the very beginning, because I would have showed exactly the ways to do it. Now I know that Paradox is thinking of adding tweaks in the upcoming update next week, and right now I obviously played on version 1.0.3, and so that's the earlier version, or that's the current version, but it will be outdated as of next week, and I'm not sure what the updates are going to be because Paradox hasn't released anything, but we do know that there is going to be some updates, potentially even nerfing, and that means maybe that there won't be a campaign of this kind, or it won't be easy to perform a campaign of this kind or this sort later on, especially on Iron mode, which is what I played on. What I'm going to do basically is just show you the map, and then maybe talk a little bit about what I did to get to this point, and then play on just till the end. I'm not sure if this video is going to show just segments or the full playthrough up until the end. So right now I'm at 1407. I only have till 1453, so not much left. But yeah, I'm basically going to show you some of the the map, and then talk about some of the things I did to get here, to get to this point. Alright, so I'm loading. So this is the map right here, and for some reason, even though I've done many of the achievements previously, I am still sometimes getting them in newer games. I don't know why, but yeah. So as people already know, the Kirghiz Khanate, which is what I started as, starts in the northeast segment of the map. It's around this area, encompasses this area, and the cultures around there are typically Turkic and Mongol cultures, part of those families. So you see there's the Mongols, you have the Naiman, you have Oghuz Turks, you have a bunch of different cultural groups all in the same place. And I suspect that some of these changed with the conquest, but yes, typically these are the groups that inhabit this area. And I did start off as Kyrgyz, so I started with the 867 AD campaign, and our starting date. And yes, so what I did was I slowly started migrating south, or attacking southward some of the groups that were around me. And that's the thing about these tribal groups, is that you get a lot of different types of casus bellis, and a lot of them are very OP in my opinion, but it helped me basically consolidate some of these areas and then extend my realms, and then it's at that point that I realized that there's a potential of going even more southward and southwestward towards modern day Iran or larger Persia, right? So that's basically what I was aiming for, and it's at that point that I realized that maybe I should convert to Islam, just for I don't know, just historical accuracy, because a lot of Turkic tribes did convert to Islam as they came closer to Islamic dynasties and Arabic-speaking dynasties, and then they became the kind of patrons of Islamic, art and Islamic history. So I wanted to kind of follow a kind of similar narrative, and I said maybe I will extend downwards. So what I did was I converted to Islam up until the point where I had consolidated a lot of areas in Central Asia, and that was really tricky, because what happened with that is that when I did convert, most of my realms were still Tengri. They followed the Tengri faith, and I had a lot of uprisings, and some of the vassals that didn't convert also joined in on these rebellions. So there was a certain point of major instability in my kingdom, or in my empire, because the Kirghiz Khanate actually is an official empire status or tiered government when you start. So going down, I basically started getting a little bit more ambitious, of course, and the type of Islam that I converted to was Ismaili, just because I also wanted to be unique, and that was really, really efficient for me, because on the one hand I did convert to Islam, but on the other hand as well, I am not a conventional Muslim group, and I'm mostly fighting with Asharis and Maturidis in the area, and I was able to get the the holy war casus belli against them, so I can actually take up large swaths of land without having to do much, basically, or without having to make request demands for casus bellis through my Grand Ayatollah or my clergy. So basically I went downwards, and because Ismailism considers the Asharis, they consider them hostile, and that's actually historically accurate. So you could get you could get a holy war casus belli against members of the same religious group in this instance when you do consider yourselves hostile. So it's not quite the same relationship between Catholic and Orthodox, and this is for the most part historically accurate, which is one of the things that I love about this game, is that it does capture some of these religious dynamics. Obviously sometimes some of these things are simplistic, but that's only because you cannot actually have a fully functioning game if you are minute with every single historical detail. So that's basically what happened, and then eventually I started getting much stronger and much stronger, up until I realized that I wanted to create my own caliphate, one that can actually pose a threat to the Abbasids who engulfed this area, mostly the Arabian Empire de jure realm. So I'll show you the empire titles. So they had a lot of the Arabian Empire, and I think at a certain point Egypt remained independent, and then they took, obviously, or they already had large parts of the Persian Empire. So I came down and I started capturing these regions, and eventually I extended all the way into Syria after Mesopotamia, and I also took the Arabian kingdom as well. I'll show you here. So this is, mind you, when I'm doing holy wars, I'm using my status as a tribal group to do conquest, but I'm also using holy wars to do kingdom conquest as well. So you'd have 2 conquests per ruler, because that's the thing, you can only do 1 kingdom tiered conquest per ruler within the casus belli category. But given that the religious my religious holy wars allowed me to do 1, and then also my conquest, because of my culture as a tribal group, allowed me to do another, I would usually take 2 kingdoms or de jure kingdom areas per individual ruler, right? So that was very useful for expansion, right? And mind you, the Byzantines were also really weak at a certain point, and the Abbasids, so I was exploiting the weakness there. And then eventually, this is the territory that I had, was really kind of going into Central Asia all the way down to the Middle East and the Arabian Peninsula. I was mostly ignoring India for that time, right? and I realized I needed to capture 2 major Islamic holy sites because I wanted to declare myself caliph. I already had Damascus, not Jerusalem. I think Jerusalem was what some crusading kingdom, but I said, Mecca and Medina would be perfectly suitable, and I declared the caliphate from then on. So that's what happened. And then eventually when I declared the caliphate, I got also great holy wars, right? So now I'm in 2, I have, basically a lot of different types of casus bellis that I can mobilize or use to capture large swaths of land. Okay, so this is one thing. Another thing is that I realized eventually when I was in Iraq that I had to change my capital. I wanted to be at the center of things and also in a place that is more developed, so I realized I could put it in Baghdad. And a lot of Islamic rulers chose Baghdad for their capitals, so I said, for the sake of sticking to historical accuracy, it would be nice. And now that I'm kind of expanding into the Mediterranean, it would be nice to be very nearby, right? Instead of being in the northeast of this map, in the corner. I forgot what the former capital was, but it's somewhere around here. It could be, it was somewhere near these mountain ranges, right? So, anyways, so I had this large territory, and then I realized that I was going to continue expanding, right? So at a certain point I said to myself, no more of this tribalism, because time's moving on, and yes, they are overpowered to a certain extent because they give you a lot of levies, but my fear was fragmentation and all sorts of things. So a lot of times, to avoid that, what I would do is I would disinherit the second child or the second son, just to make sure that the kingdom doesn't split up. I'd make sure to keep always one son, because sometimes, and you can explain this to me because I tend to forget sometimes, but the rulers would be when the ruler passes away, sometimes a new de jure empire is created automatically and granted to the second son, and then it would splinter. So I wanted to avoid that, and I always keep one son, and I wouldn't, I'd make sure that the sons are alive in case I needed them for anything later, or in case my heir died, but I would make sure to keep one male heir. So now when I became, I decided to become a clan system. And then this was the dangerous thing, because when I did finally convert my culture into a clan culture, when we became a clan, yes, we were getting the technological innovation that we needed to catch up to the rest of the world. So yes, the levies was something very important, but eventually I was really worried about not being able to lay sieges in later games because of walls, and I don't have the technological advancements to do so. So I became a clan. And this was very common for some of these Turkic tribes that did convert to Islam at a certain point, and they settled in these developed areas, especially Mesopotamia and in Anatolia and in modern day Iran or Persia. So they did, adopt the ways of these, these urban settings that they, sometimes they took on these cultures. I remained Kirghiz though. I didn't want to lose that because a lot of my vassals were Kirghiz, and this is really important because, you get a different culture penalty with your vassals, and I didn't want to, change my culture and have a Kirghiz-run empire and then losing minus 15 points on that issue. So I decided to stay Kirghiz for this practical reason. Okay, so this is one of the major phases. And then eventually Egypt comes and everything. And I'm using Great Holy Wars every time. So jihad, I'm calling for jihad. Now, as I'm doing that, I'm incorporating major realms. And the thing is that the jihad, and I'm not sure whether they're going to nerf it or not, but at the time when I was playing, it was so strong because you wage a war and then your vassals who are the same religion join in. So you have, all these people coming in and joining you, and then stack wiping everything. So you're just basically walking through your enemies, and this is the thing. So again, I don't know what's going to happen, and there's a lot of players who have been pointing out the weaknesses in Christian dynasties as well, and Catholicism specifically. Catholics tend to be very weak in terms of fervor at the very beginning of the game, so I exploited that. They would fail in their crusades, and they never actually called a crusade against me ever. Eventually I invaded Rome. I invaded Rome, I think it was the first thing in Europe, at least in Southern Europe. And then eventually, as I'm expanding, I reached a point where people or my vassals were blobbing for me. So as I'm expanding my territories, they were blobbing for me. And now I'm expanding. And again, still using Great Holy Wars, using religious wars as well, and using conquests, right? And then whenever, I don't know, I would find some Ismaili groups, for example, splintering for me for some reason, or I lose some realms, I can later incorporate them because you also have a subjugation casus belli against members of your own religious group. So that was quite useful as well. Initially I didn't take notice of that, but I realized you can actually subjugate an entire group, and I think even an empire. And I'm going to explain why that's important later, because eventually there was a splinter at a certain point. But yeah, so now as I become a clan, I'm faced with the difficulty of losing my levies. I'm basically they're halved or even a third of the initial levies I had. That was really scary because I was worried that eventually I would be exposed by the Byzantines and other Muslim empires around me. Luckily, nothing of that sort happened. So I remained in my current situation. No one actually attacked me. And then eventually over time I started building up my levies again. So obviously not quite to the same number that I had when I was a tribe, but still. Anyways, the expansion is still going on. Everything is good. Great Holy Wars, like I said. And there's something that I didn't understand about the Great Holy Wars, so I'm hoping that players who understand these mechanics more, who understand this mechanic or have been using it quite a lot, can tell me how the incorporation takes place into your realm, because at some points they would be incorporated into my realm. I think the first 3 or 4 jihads, and I didn't wage that many, maybe about 6 to 8 throughout the whole campaign, but the first few were incorporated into my realm immediately, and the people were just vassals. I think it might have to do with the beneficiary that you pick, but they were always family members when I picked them, but sometimes they would end up in my realms and other times not. In any case, I'm expanding, and then eventually I start blobbing all over, also by virtue of help from my vassals, who were amazing for that reason. And wow, that was just very useful. So around this area and kind of western Siberia or modern day Russia, there are still some independent kingdoms and duchies, mostly of let me tell you, the cultures were Permian mostly, but you can see Kyrgyz is starting to become predominant in these areas. But before, it was Permian groups and their local religions as well. You can see now there aren't many left. Actually, no, they're completely gone. Those local, I'm talking about the Suomanusko faiths. So these were kind of disappearing, and then because of the Ismailism. So you can see here I'm really expanding also religiously. So I'm also on the verge of not just a realm conquest, but an entire religious conquest. And I think that's what I'm going to try to aim for before the patch, and maybe show you in later segments. So I'm going to actually film all the way to, or record all the way to the end. But for now, I'm just going to talk about the experience, and then in the next videos, I'm just going to continue playing and then see what's going to go on, and maybe see if there's a kind of border gore situation that happens if I lose these realms, because the situation is quite precarious. If you go into the faction area, you can see I do got many factions against me, and this is the thing about expanding, right? A lot of them are kind of religious popular movements or populist movements by peasants. And you can see here some of these really powerful vassals can't join factions against me because I'm married to their family members. So I secured alliances. Very important. I'll explain that later. So yeah, eventually, as I'm starting to blob, I actually have much of the British Isles, parts of Scandinavia. I'm getting into India, and then I go into a war in the Tibetan region. And this is kind of where I started to screw up, because a lot of the kind of local groups started rising up against me, and I'd go to war. And then the problem with this area is that there are a lot of issues with the supply realm, or the supply. So my soldiers are dying, and then my levies are being halved, and factions are rising up against me, independence faction specifically. So I get a bunch of really powerful vassals, and what I do is I do the typical thing. I try to please them. But no, that doesn't work. Even though they have a high opinion of me, they're still not interested in remaining within my domains. So this is where I get really frustrated. I try to stop them, and I try to end them, and I give them vassals, I give them even lands, and some of them are at the 90 opinion percentage, and yet they still don't like me. So I realize, okay, I'm about to get really I'm about to enter a really precarious situation, and I think they were at like 200% power, and they were going to call for independence in like a couple of months, and I didn't know what to do. I start panicking, but there's nothing I can actually do, and that's because I was still kind of unaware of the circumstances. I thought that if you please them, then it's sufficient to get rid of them. No, but I think what there is here in this game is that there's also a mechanic that once they get also so powerful, it's not just about their good opinion of you, but it's also about their power. So even if they have a good opinion of you, they're going to remain in the independence areas, or in the independence factions, because they're powerful enough to resist you, and they really have no interest in remaining within your domains, or your realms. So eventually a civil war ensues, and I screwed up big time. I wasn't able to stop them. They were everywhere. They were spread out everywhere. They captured major cities. They got the 100% war score, and all my efforts collapsed. So when I started realizing that I can go and do world conquests, that's when I get this problem. And I was kind of frustrated because it would have been my first Paradox victory, or world conquest ever, pardon me. So it would have been my first world conquest in any Paradox games, and I came close in the past in CK2, and similar problem with factions happened. So I was really frustrated, and at a certain point I was on the verge of giving up. It was around 1200, and also the blood gore was disgusting. I mean, the maps looked ugly. The way that the kingdom was, or pardon me, the world was split up was kind of really weird borders in between mine, and they're just kind of overlapping, and the colors are ugly. So it's not kind of some contiguous territory that you have going on here. So, which would have been nice if that happened, but it was not pleasant to look at whatsoever. So it's around the late 1200s, late 13th century, and then I'm like, okay, I figured I'm gonna give up. Then I realized, no, maybe I shouldn't. Later on, then I noticed the subjugation casus belli. Now, a lot of the people who broke off were Ismailis, so I can just subjugate them. And I waited for some of the ones who were weaker or stronger to get weaker later on, so I let them be, and then eventually I went and hunted them down. And then slowly but surely I started building up my forces again, right? And now I start expanding, and I'm getting much closer to the intended goal of a world conquest, and even closer than ever before. And then eventually I'm hit with the same problem, the faction problems. And this is where I realized, okay, I'm about to lose everything once again, and this is becoming a kind of an effort, a meaningless effort. And I could be playing other games, because I like to play tall. I like the storytelling elements of of playing tall, because you're focusing on your smaller amounts of vassals, and you can read, and you're not just clicking and invading and worrying. You're just really focusing on your realm, developing it, making a lot of money, and increasing your levies without having this massive territory. I don't know, I just really wanted to do the world conquest just for once, right? So then I realized, it struck me that there's a way that you can go around it, and it's to play tyrannical. So I started looking into ways that you don't actually incur that much penalty from playing tyrannical, and I realized that even if you do, people are gonna hate you. But there's also the aspect of fear, right? And right, so people being terrified of you, and as opposed to just being intimidated. So you have those two categories: intimidated and terrified. And that means that you know, if they're terrified of you, they're less likely to oppose you directly, or never. In fact, it says they will never oppose you directly. As for the ones who are intimidated by you, I think it's less likely. But the point is, there are perks of, you know, being kind of the bad guy as well, and that's because people will fear joining factions. So that's what I started doing. One thing, I started imprisoning some faction members when I realized that the percentage was high enough to, you know, the likelihood of being able to imprison them without them rising up against me. Sometimes they were 100%, because I think it's a question of proximity and intrigue and all these circumstances that play into the percentage of, or the likelihood of being able to imprison them. So I started imprisoning people, big faction members, and when it said that, you know, their faction military power was, or contribution was around 30% or more, that's when I went for them, or sometimes I tried to kill them. But the point is, I'm playing tyrannically here, and I'm getting rid of some people, and other people, the ones that I realized I couldn't do anything because it was 0% chance or very slim chances to be able to imprison them. What I did was I actually sometimes tried to kill them, but usually if you can't imprison them, it's also hard to kill them. Although you can pay off some people to increase the likelihood. You play around with the intrigue by bringing people in, or not play around, but you bolster it by bringing people in with high intrigue around you. For example, you can use your wife in the council system, and then you can get her to focus on intrigue, for example. And, you know, here you can see I have the steward is, you know, a really terrible steward. You know, he's terrified by me, but I think I was trying to appease him at a certain point. But no, I should have a steward that's worthy of being a steward, such as Khan Saytek Sevench. So I'll assign him. But yeah, I was really mindful of these factions, and I started getting rid of them eventually by getting rid of their heads, or the, you know, the top people within them, imprisoning, killing. And then what I did was I started building up dread. You know, I used the natural dread, and people start getting terrified. Executions whenever I can. Kill people who don't give you a penalty. So, you know, when people rise up, right, you kill them. So what I was able to do is, especially if they're members of other religions, because you won't incur any tyrannical penalties. So build up your dread. Don't be afraid of using it when you should be using it, right? So I started doing all sorts of things like that, and I avoided the catastrophe that I had initially, because I could have reached world conquest much earlier, but I reached it in 1407. So this is when I reached it. I paused it at this point. And I started getting rid of all of my enemies. And then where I couldn't actually fight them, what I started doing was looking for marriages. You know, can I marry with them and form alliances? And that's what I started doing. I have many children. They have many children, because, you know, that's the perk of playing as a religious group that allows for polygamous marriages, or polygamy for the male, because you can have secondary spouses, and those secondary spouses will yield many children, and then you can use those children to marry into these other families, or marry with them. So what you do is, when you marry a powerful vassal, so let's see, maybe with Khan Tekin, for example, if we can do something about it and get rid of him. Just to show you an example, arranged marriage. This is very basic, right? You look for alliance power. So this is my son, and let's see if he has anything to offer. Yes, so his daughter, for example. You send a proposal, and then watch how he's going to disappear from the independence faction here. Very slowly. See? Excellent. So we formed an alliance, and he disappeared. And in fact, because he was the head of that faction, the faction is completely gone, right? And the other people don't have an incentive of remaining because they're so weak. So I got rid of the faction. So I did that. Have as many kids as you can. Marry with your vassals. You know? Stabilize it. I think maybe they might nerf it later on, but, you know, Islamic dynasties are very overpowered for that reason, because you can just marry your way through this kind of realm, and then get rid of factions against you, and get rid of this catastrophe I was talking about, because that was a really dangerous one. In fact, I forgot to mention is that when I actually, you know, the independence faction declared a war against me, other factions came followed suit, and then, you know, you had populist movements. So the whole realm was fragmented. So that's basically it. Yes, that's what I did, and I found it to be easy at the end because everyone's blobbing for you, and the rest was just clicking, finding independent realms here and there, subjugating them if they're smiley, or using religious holy war, Casus Belli, or conquest or whatnot. And people are doing it for me as well. You know, my powerful vassals, because they have ambitions, they have de jure claims around them. And yeah, that's basically the whole thing. So I'm gonna end the video right now, and you know, just to have it as an independent segment, and then eventually I'm going to continue later on with the playthrough. But one last thing I was going to say just before I finish off: if you want to build Dread and you want to play tyrannically, go into the legacy section. I think it's really important to know that you also can use legacy to accrue you know, less tyrannical or to accrue less tyrannical penalties by having this minus 0.05 monthly you know, perk for tyranny when you play tyrannically. So people will be more forgetful. So if you want to play this, you know, tyrannical side, go play as, you know, start with Guile. Guile is really good. Sometimes, most of the time, I start with Law because I like popular opinion. I like being seen as a good person. I like growth. But you know, you should start with either of the two, in my opinion, if you're aiming for this, you know, really massive realms. Because yes, warfare is important. Everything is important, obviously. But when you're getting really big in the first place, anyways, you just have so many levies that people do the job for you. But you know, I think, you know, if you want to play tyrannically, then use this style, and then get the venial trait or venial trait for your dynasty, or the legacy rather, not the trait, and that will help you a lot. So yeah, so that's about it for today, for this segment. And like I said, I'm gonna be filming more, and I'm gonna be adding more stuff to this channel, and hopefully it's gonna be able to grow and reach out to a larger CK audience. But for now, you know, thank you so much for watching this, and I'll be back with more videos very shortly. Thank you.